The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Father, thank you for this time together, sharing your word, to read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest it. May it bear fruit in our hearts, in our lives, and in our actions. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, now today we are going to look at chapters 6 and 7. And it's an interesting 2 chapters, has a lot of action in it. And we have 4 folks, so the 4 of you are going to have to read. I would want someone to read chapter 6, verses 1 to 9, and then another person from 10 to the end, 14, and then another person from chapter 1, verse 1 to 5, and another person from 6 to 10.
I'll go first.
All right, Pam is first, 1
I'm
to
going
9.
to suggest you put Lorraine last since she's still eating.
Oh, sure. Okay, I'll go last if Lorraine doesn't come. So
Okay.
I'll do the second half of 6.
Okay, and Carol will do the first part of 7, and I will do the last part of 7 unless Lorraine comes. Okay, or someone else. Okay, go ahead, Pam.
That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, who is in the court? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me?
Oh, yes, go ahead, Marilyn.
Okay, then the king said to Haman, hurry and get the robes and the horse and provide these honors for Mordecai, the Jew. Do everything for him that you have suggested. You will find him sitting at the entrance of the palace. So Haman got the robes and the horse and put the robes on Mordecai. Mordecai got on the horse and Haman led him through the city square, announcing to the people as they went, see how the king rewards a man he wishes to honor. Mordecai then went back to the palace entrance with Haman, hurried home, covering his face in embarrassment. He told his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then she and those wise friends of his told him, you are beginning to lose power to Mordecai. He is a Jew and you cannot overcome him. He will certainly defeat you. While they were still talking, the palace eunuchs arrived in a hurry to take Haman to Esther's banquet.
Thank you, Pam and Marilyn. Go ahead, Carol.
Now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day, also as they drank their wine at the banquet, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted. And what is your request? Even to half of the dinner shall be done. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me as my petition and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance of the king. Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is he, who would presume to do thus.
Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Okay, thank you very much. Now today you'll see an ironic change or turn of events. The night between Esther's two dinner parties, the first and the second, will be a turning point in the lives of Haman and Mordecai. And it begins in chapter 6. And we read in the first 3 verses, that night the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bethana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received from this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. So here we see now that the king begins with a sleepless, the night is a sleepless one for the king, and you're going to start seeing a whole set of what I call God incidences, one after the other, where God's providence is going to be featured throughout these next 2 chapters. And they're strung together until Mordecai and Haman changes places in the story. The king is suffering from insomnia, cannot sleep, and so in order to pass the hours of the sleepless night, he had no television to watch. So he decided, why not listen to the whole record of all that I have done since I have been king? Listen to all have the chronicles read to me of my reign. And so this is an unlikely kind of decision, but that's what he wants. He probably wants to feel good about himself. And so they are read. And in these records, remembering that they will probably be reading these records, so one asked me this morning, what time do you think this all took place? Because it seems pretty early in the morning. And I said, for one, my thought process of it is that probably the king couldn't sleep after midnight, after 1 o'clock in the morning. And so, you know, these folks always have servants 24/7, and he calls one of them and tells them, I want you to read. And by the time you will see that Haman was in the courtyard, it could probably be like 5 o'clock in the morning, remembering they're reading the chronicles of his reign. So they're reading at least 5 years of information about him during his reign. And so by the time, and remember Mordecai's, what Mordecai did for him was most recent, and that is mentioned in the Chronicles as well. And that makes it quite interesting. So you'll see that Mordecai's past kindness in preventing the assassination plot against the king, saving the king's life, is mentioned in verse 2. So you could just figure that it started from the very beginning of King Ahasuerus' reign and came right down to where he is right now. And in there, we have Mordecai's goodness toward the king. Now, it also, we have to put ourselves in mind of Haman in chapter 5, where Haman had already prepared a gallows for Mordecai's demise, and he had also done that in the early hours of the morning. So isn't it ironic that while the king is dreaming about Mordecai, is being read about Mordecai being good to him, we see now Haman is building a gallows to destroy Mordecai, and while the king is about to honor Mordecai. And so we come to the point where we see then that the king is troubled by the fact that nothing has been done for the goodness that Mordecai has done for the king. And so we see here that already we can see the sovereignty and the providence of God coming out in this whole event, because you can see the fact that God wanted the king to remember what Mordecai had done for him. And what better way to do that is to have the Chronicles read, which has that information in. So you could see that as a God providence, a God incident taking place right there. And then we go on to verses 4 to 9. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the courtyard, the outer court of the palace, to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court." "Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him what should be done for the man the king delights to honor. Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on a horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" And so again, you're seeing this whole remarkable, this ironic turn of events taking place in these verses as well, because here is it that Haman appears on the scene with the intention of speaking to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected. And we will find that toward the end of it, he is going to be it is going to be a change of events for him, because he's not going to get what he wanted. Instead, he is met with a different different request from the king. And one of the things that we need to realize is that the king now, he wants to find out, what can I do for Mordecai? And true to form, the king, who is very impulsive, very spontaneous, he doesn't use his own brain, he likes to seek advice. And so he seeks advice from Haman, and Haman responds. Haman thinks that it is him. But the thing that we have to watch in this whole situation is a couple of things. One, the two men are not aware of each other's motives. The two men are not aware of each other's motives. The king's wishes is to honor Mordecai. Haman's wishes is to get rid of him. And the two of them, none of the two of them know what the other one is thinking or is requesting. That's the first thing. Only us as the reader reading know what their motives and what the motives are driving each person. We know that, but remember, they don't know that. The other thing that we have to also realize is that Ahasuerus needs Haman's help in ordering Mordecai, the same way that Haman needs the king's support to dispose of Mordecai. So you have this whole what can I say? This whole these two men are in this kind of a tug of war, this an ironic situation, because one, they don't know each other's motives. Two, they both need each other to implement whatever motive they got, and at the same time, they still don't know what those motives are. And another ironic thing that has come out as well that is interesting to note is that if you remember in chapter 3, verses 8 to 11, when Haman wanted the king to agree to kill the Jews, the Haman never told the king which people they are. He never said, I want the Jews killed. He only referred to them as these certain people, a certain people. So he doesn't tell the king. Up to now, the king does not know that he has sent out a decree to kill a group of people, and he don't even know who they are he sent out to kill.
How stupid is that?
But it is. He does not know that he has sent an order out to kill the Jews. Up to this point in time, he does not know. And so the interesting ironic note here is that Haman withheld the identity of the Jews when he went to the king to tell him that he wants to kill these people. And now what the king does, he withholds the identity of Mordecai from Haman. So so Haman doesn't know who he wants to honor. He just thinks it's him, but the king doesn't tell him who it is until he hears everything that he should do, and then tells him who it's for. So you see again the irony going on here between these two guys. And so when Xerxes or Ahasuerus asks what a king should do to honor someone, Haman thinks it's him that he's honoring. And so what does Haman do? Haman wants a public display in royal trappings. It is almost as if Haman wants to be king himself, because he wants the king robe, he wants the king's horse, he wants the king's crest. He just interested in being paraded up and down the streets as if he was the king. And one of the things that we need to realize that is when you wear a royal robe, it signifies a royal robe that the king has worn. It signifies that you have unique favor with the king. You are beloved by the king. Hi, Lorraine. You're beloved by the king. And also wearing another person's clothes was in those days meant that, or symbolized that you share in that individual's power and prominence and honor and so forth. So again, you see, Haman. That's why I said earlier, Haman is pretending that he wants to be king because he wants to be wearing the king's clothes, and he knows that gives him a sense of power and prominence and honor. But keeping true to form, as is expected, the king follows Haman's advice. He hears some advice, he likes it. He doesn't make any decisions on his own. He hears his advice, he likes it, and he calls on Haman to execute the plan. So we find now in verse 10, it says, "Go at once," the king commanded Haman, "get the robe and the horse, and to just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." So just imagine how his heart must have felt, how he must have felt, knowing that he wanted to go to the king to ask the king to kill this man, give him permission to kill this man, and now he has to be parading him up and down the streets. Again, it is a twist of the plan that comes as Mordecai is revealed to Haman as the one who the king wants to honor. And and we need to realize too is that Haman's dream of grandeur is now crushed, and it now becomes a living nightmare as he leads in honoring the man he most despises. And so instead of Mordecai being executed in disgrace on the gallows, he is now lifted high on a horse in honor and appreciation. Obviously, you know that Haman then could go and ask the king to have him killed after he's being honored by the king. And then we find one other thing I want to mention in this, which is very telling, is you see in verse 10, the king says, get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Now remember, if you remember in chapter 5 and verse 13, when Haman refers to Mordecai, let's read it. Go, someone read for me verse 13 of chapter 5.
But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate.
Okay, who said these words?
Haman,
And how does he refer to Mordecai?
that Jew Mordecai.
And how does that term sound to you all?
Pejorative. Pejorative.
Okay, exactly. And so we have a situation here where the king, where Mordecai refers to where Haman refers to Mordecai with disdain, with sarcasm, with in a derogatory way, all these sort of things. And the king, on the other hand, when we read verse 10 just now, the king says, get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew. And it sounds now that Jew Mordecai, which is a very derogatory term, has now become a term of honor in the reverse. Mordecai the Jew is almost like saying Jesus the Christ. And so you hear now the king is elevating Mordecai, knowing he is a Jew, and elevating him in that way. He does not see the Jews in a disdainful way at all. And that is where it gets even interesting as we get to the end of the book. So that is where I wanted to point that out to you, where there's another irony there, where Haman refers to Mordecai in a derogatory way, and the king refers to him as a man of honor in an honorable way. And then in chapters 12 to 14, afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. So we see now that after the celebration, Mordecai returns to the king's gate, business as usual, but Haman is understandably devastated. And interestingly enough, before it was Mordecai who was mourning when the decree came out that they were going to be killed. Now it is Haman who is exhibiting mourning symptoms, mourning behavior instead of Mordecai, because he realizes that things are turning on him. The tables are turning. And to make matters worse, when he sees his wife and his friends and his advisors, they are going to tell him that, fella, if this man is a Jew, you're a goner. You're going to suffer.
Why?
12. And
Why
that's
specifically because he's a Jew?
because, and that's where we got another God incident. Obviously, the Persian people know that when the God of the Jews, because of the God that they have, the Jews will ultimately be indestructible. You will not be able to destroy them because of the God that they serve. And this would have been proven on other occasions as well. And this here is a God moment as well.
I got
Where,
it. Okay.
yeah, you got it? This is a God moment
Mhm.
because once you are a Jew, God is the God that they serve is going to save them. There's a history of that.
Right. Got it.
So that is why they feel that way. My problem with that is that I'm surprised they did not know he was a Jew from before, because Mordecai called him that Jew. Sorry, not Mordecai. Haman used to call him that Jew, Mordecai. So I'm surprised that his family did not realize that he was a Jew.
It doesn't really seem like they say that they don't realize it, though.
No, it doesn't say that, but obviously at some point they realize that he is a Jew,
Right.
so that they're able to tell him that if this man is a Jew, if he's of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin, and that is because the God of the Jews will deliver them. He will conquer. And obviously they're right. I mean, it will be proven correct. And so we see then that after he receives the devastating news from his family, the king's messengers arrive to take him to the banquet. And one thing about taking him away from the banquet is not something unusual in those days. If you were invited to the king's house, you would be escorted. Guests would be usually escorted to feast like that. So it isn't to say as if they knew something about him and they were grabbing him or whatever. It's just that they're escorting him to the. Okay. Any questions on chapter 6 before we go to chapter 7? Is it that straightforward? Yes, Carol.
Oh, no, I'm just killing a pop-up, that's all.
Oh, okay. All right. No questions from anybody?
Just maybe a comment.
A comment? Yeah.
Yeah, that oh, that's all right. Forget it. I don't know how to phrase it.
All right. You sure you want to take
No,
another?
that's all right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now in chapter 7, we see here again the plot thickens. Let's read verses 1 to 4. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther, and as they were drinking wine on that second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life, that is my petition, and spare my people, that is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. And here what we are going to now get in chapter 7 is a major teaching lesson in humility versus exaltation. Already we have gotten the message of humility. Mordecai is humble. He was exalted. He was honored. And you will see that he will be honored again. And look and note, look at Mordecai. Mordecai was honored, and he didn't just start thinking that, oh, I'm the bee's knees and the cat's whiskers. What does he do? He goes back to his simple life. He goes back to being at the king's gate. He goes back to, he's still humble. Even with all the honor he was getting, he was humble, always humble. Now we are going to see the difference and the flip side where those who exalt themselves is being humble as God, as Jesus spoke about. And the chapter opens with the second banquet that Queen Esther has prepared for her husband. I like to call it the deadly dinner, because it will end up in the death of Haman. And you see that the king again is asking the third time, Esther, the third time, what is your request? What is your petition? And again, you see that Esther is strategic as well. She's a courageous, strategic woman. He asked the first time, he asked the second time, but now she feels that she's ready to take advantage of his goodwill. Whether it is that she's doing this on her own, I doubt it. I believe her heart through God is moving her to say, this is the right time now to tell the king what I want. And so you find that she addresses him for the first time in the second person, saying, if I have won your favor, O king, instead of using the first person, if I have won the king's favor, as she did in chapter 5 and verse 8. And also remember that Queen Esther has never revealed her identity to her husband. Her husband still does not know she's a Jew. And so we have to also remember that up to this point, he still does not know. And so she is now ready to be direct in her petition. And so she reveals her request, but she does not reveal her identity. And you realize she does not tell him who the people are or who she is. She just says, my people, and she says, my life. And so we see that she doesn't, as I said, reveal her identity, nor that of the people to the king in making her requests. And what she does is, as well, is that she identifies herself as part of the group of people to be killed. And then she goes on to more or less paraphrase what Haman did. And she says, for I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. And the word sold in this case is used because, if you remember, Haman promised the king how many talents of silver?
Oh, a lot. 20,000, wasn't it?
10,000.
10,000.
10,000 talents of silver. So to put into the treasury. So here she is saying is that myself and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. So that is where that, and all this time the king, I don't even know if the king realizes what is going on here, but I am sure Haman is beginning to get the picture of what is going on here, because the decree did speak about destruction and slaughter and annihilation. And she then says to the king, if we were being sold as slaves, I wouldn't even bother you. We would have been okay with it. But the fact that we are going to be killed is why she has come before the king to bother him. And then we see in verses 5 and 6, King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. And so what we see here is that when the king asks who is the perpetrator of this projected genocide, Esther responds that it is Haman. And it causes the king to storm out of the room to the garden in anger. But again, it says nothing about reversing Haman's edict. And we see here in verse 7, the king got up in a rage, left his wine. He left his wine. And I mean, you know, I mean, they had to put that in. He left his wine, you know, because he loved wine, and went out into the palace gate. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. And just as the king returned from the palace gate, the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" And as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So one of the things I would share with you is that in those days, and in the Persian culture and in others as well, that meals were customarily taken when reclining on a couch. They didn't sit down at dining tables like we do and that sort of stuff. They will be more or less like lying on the couch as they ate whatever meal they were being served. And what we see here is what we're beginning to see is that Haman realizes now that the king has decided his fate. I'm not sure if he knew what that fate was, whether it was that he will lose his job or whether he will be killed, but he knew that whatever it was not going to be good. And here he decided then that instead of running after the king, he wanted now to go to the queen to see if the queen can put in a good word for him with the king to not let anything bad happen to him. And while he was doing that, the king again, and yes, Pam.
So I just have to say, at this point, it really sounds like this is an apocryphal story, because is this guy stupid too? This vile and what'd she call him?
The adversary and enemy is this vile
Is
or
this-
this wicked Haman.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and now he wants to ask her to save him? What? Stupid?
Well, you see, the thing is about it is, as you realize, he already felt, I mean, the king, obviously he couldn't go to before the king. The king was angry. He stormed out of the room. So he could not go to the king. And for some reason he felt that, well, the king had already decided what he's going to do with him, whatever it was. But maybe he could still beg and plead with the queen to save his life or to save him or what have you. And yes, it could be coming off as stupid, which can be true, but I guess he had to make a last ditch effort for himself.
I guess, yeah.
and that's the only way he can do it.
Maybe Haman was drunk too.
Maybe he was drunk too.
Yeah.
That could be too. That
That
is
is
quite
right.
possible.
That
It is quite possible. But the thing is about it is to note, the interesting thing here is to note is that, and it's not to say that what Esther says about what was about to happen isn't the reason or part of the reason why Haman was killed, but you cannot overlook when the king comes back, when the king returns, and he sees Haman falling on the couch with his wife, and he says, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" So in other words, whatever position he found Haman in was a very compromising position. And he felt that his wife was going to be sexually assaulted, for lack of a better phraseology. And obviously that even enraged him, because they tell you as soon as the words left the king's mouth, they cover Haman's face, which means, fella, you're done. You're a goner. It almost tells you when you're about to be executed, is put a bag over your face, something over your face. Well, they covered his face. And so it tells you you're done, you're dead. And So even although what Esther did in terms of telling them would have was the beginning of the end for Haman, surely when the king came back and found him in the position he found him, that sealed the deal for Haman. There was no return. There was no turning back. There wasn't, the only body who could save him then was God himself, and that wasn't happening. So you see here too is that the king behaves, especially when it comes to his wives, he behaves very irrational. You remember with Vashti, because she disobeyed him, he was like, boom, you're gone, I'm going to banish you from here. And then now in this case with Esther, it is that his wife is about to be, for lack of a better word, assaulted by this man, and so he reacts again in a kind of in that kind of way. And then when we see verses 9 and 10, then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He made it for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. And you see, and you hear, and Harbona is really rubbing it in. Hey man, he building this gallows for this man. This man help you, king. And the thing about it is, and that again tells you, it introduces even another charge against Haman. So not only does he want to kill the queen and her people, he wants to molest the queen, and now he wants to kill the man who saved the king's life. So this is almost a triple set of charges, all one after the other against Haman. And so it is interesting how this all develops. The king said, hang him on it. So they hang Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. And so it is interesting as it comes to that point, how Haman is, the exalted Haman is now humbled, and he becomes the victim instead of Mordecai. And you'll see that chapter 7 ends with Haman's execution, but yet still the edict that he has put out for the annihilation of the Jews still remains in force. And up to this point in time, at the end of chapter 7, the king still does not know the nationality of the people that he has sent edict out to kill, or does he know the nationality of his wife still? He does not up to this point in time.
He's pretty stupid, I think. He doesn't know what he's, with all the power and the spies and so forth he probably has. He doesn't know his wife is a Jew.
But you see, the thing is about, you see, the thing is, I mean, you would have thought, being the king, he would have probably known that. I mean, obviously we know that when they talked to him about getting a wife after Vashti, they went out in the whole kingdom, in which the Jews also lived in the Persian kingdom, and they picked up people who were women who were virgins, and they brought them in, and they didn't, I guess they didn't screen, I mean, they didn't screen them to find out if they were Jews or not. And just brought them into the king. And it's just that she won favor with the king, obviously by the providence of God. God chose her and put it into the mind of the king to choose her. And so that's how she ended up being the queen. But no one really went around saying, well, are you Jew? Are you American? Are you Barbadian? Are you whatever? They never did anything like that. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes, Carol.
Going back to Mordecai, when it said he went back to outside the king's gate, what does that mean exactly?
That he went back outside to the king's gate?
Yeah. Does it just mean that he went back to a very humble life?
Yes, he went back to his normal life. He went back to his normal life of living. And that's what it meant. He went back doing what he had been doing before he was honored by the king.
Okay, so he just wasn't in the palace.
No, he was not. He was not. He never worked. Well, as we get to the end of the book, I mean, I'm telling tales out of school, but you should have read the book. You will realize that he will become one of the people in the palace after that. But up to this point in time, no, he had no reason to be in the palace at all because he had no position in the palace. Yeah. So he just went back to his humble, ordinary life. And that is the thing that plays out here. And that's why I even said to the class this morning, and we need to look at it in that way too. Look, because we might think that, yes, some of these things in this book seem out of whack, but at the same time, some of them are not so out of whack because there are people who are like this. There are people who are like Haman. There are people who are like Mordecai. And it goes back to what Jesus says in the Gospels, that those who are humble will be exalted, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who exalt themselves will be humble. And here we have a classic example of what Jesus spoke about taking place in this story, and it happens in people's lives. And even, I mean, this is a phraseology I don't even like so much, where we used to hear people say, what goes around comes around. And this is exactly what happens to Haman, because here is it that he's preparing a gallows to kill someone, and he prepares a gallows for his own self. And he is killed on it. So although there's, as I said, although God's name is not mentioned in this book, you cannot get a book with so much in behind. You could tell God is so much a part of this book. He seeps throughout every single thing in this book. And it goes back to our own lives, because sometimes we think that God is not present. And the thing is about it is that God is always present. And we may not realize it when it's happening, but if you were to reflect back at it, you'll see, my golly, that's what God was doing. God did this so that this can happen, so that can happen, so this can happen. And God has been there all the time. But oftentimes we don't even realize he has been. So, I know you didn't ask all of that, Carol, but
that also dovetails into the research that I did for the question a few weeks ago about Purim and the butterflies and
yes,
the butterfly effect and all that. Like I forget what the saying is, but like if a butterfly flaps its wings in such and such, they're a hurricane in such and such.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. So yeah, it's an interesting book. It is an interesting book, and although people wondered why it was in the Bible, you can tell why it was in the Bible because it shows you God's working behind the scenes in our lives when we don't even realize that he is. And that's why it's there. Any other comments? Any other questions? Marilyn, you okay?
I'm okay.
Is the cold up there too much for you now? Time to come home?
Yeah, it's cold up here. It was like 32 this morning.
Oh my
Come home.
God.
Come home.
That's freezing. That's freezing
Where
point.
are you?
Yeah.
Where
She's
are
in
you?
Connecticut.
Oh,
She's in Connecticut. She's in Connecticut. Oh my golly. So if you're at 32, you know what Maine that? Or New Hampshire. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a cold.
Well,
it gets warmer. It gets warmer during the day. Like they get up to about 60 during the day. So
Well, that's not so bad.
Well, no, that's
yeah,
not
so I
bad.
took a
That's
walk.
good.
I still take my walks in the afternoon. I wait for the sun to come out.
That's good.
Yeah,
Well,
good.
we went, I think, to 79 or 80 today. We'll probably go down to 60 something tonight. So
Yeah.
that's
It's
perfect
nice.
for us. Perfect. You can't have more perfect temperature than that.
Mhm. I agree.
No humidity. The low
No
humidity.
and no humidity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a big difference.
And that does make a big difference. No humidity. It is just perfect weather. Perfect.
I think
Even yesterday evening at the service that we had for All Souls Day, perfect weather.
Yeah.
You could not get more perfect than that.
Did you have a good turnout?
Yes, in my opinion, I think we did. We had nearly 40 people there, I think, about
That's good,
37, I
yeah.
think. We had about 37 people there, and it was really intimate and touching. In fact, I will tell you honestly, there were this morning, I hope I'm not telling tales out of school. Didn't tell me I couldn't say it, but the two of the folks who were there yesterday were not members of our church. Well, there were more than two that were not members, but these two were not members. And I did not even know that their daughter was about to die. They were at the funeral, at the service, and they left the service, I think, at minutes to 7, because the service was just 1 hour. It started at 6 on the dot, finished at 7:05. And but their daughter was gravely ill and about to die, and they left, I think, at minutes to 7 to go and see her. She died at 8 o'clock the night.
Oh,
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
yeah.
And but but the member who is a friend of theirs called me this morning and just wanted to let me know that that when they were at the service, the words in my sermon touched them greatly as they prepared for their daughter's death.
Oh, wow, that's good.
So yes, and in fact, they told him last night, and then they called again this morning and said the same thing again. And so he wanted me to know that my sermon touched them as they prepared for their daughter's death. So yeah.
It's wonderful. I was going to ask you if they had found any comfort from being there, but you answered the question. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So yes, it was a wonderful service. Wonderful service. I just could not complain. It was beautifully organized, and everybody had everything out, the chairs and everything, and altar and song system and keyboard playing, and oh, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Beautiful. So, yep. And there are lights in the cemetery. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry I didn't go. I was going to go, and I don't know what happened at the last minute. I guess I got tired or something. It sounds like it was a lovely.
It was a lovely service. A lovely
Yeah.
service. All right, everyone. Have a good night.
You too.
Wait.
Oh, sorry. Oh, here, wait.
Tired.
Hold on. Look at Pam. Look, that's it there. See Pam background?
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
nice. Yeah.
That's the Eucharist, the celebration of the Eucharist part there.
It's flipped,
Nice.
but anyway,
Thank you, Pam.
that's how I could do it in a hurry. So.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice.
Wow. You must be tired, Father. You've had a long day.
I am. I really am. Yeah. Oh, well, just pray for me, please. Just pray.
Okay. And thank you.
And thank you so much, too. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you, Pam.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.